Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your state, city, or country in the comments below. And if you believe loyalty can survive even the harshest winter, hit like and follow along. Because what happened in the Alaskan wilderness still feels impossible every time I remember it. I spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL, and during that time I learned a simple rule: blood always tells a story. Most people see blood and panic. We were trained to stop, observe, and listen. A single drop can reveal direction, speed, injury, fear, and sometimes the difference between life and death. The day this story began, I was alone nearly 60 miles north of Fairbanks, Alaska. Winter had swallowed the landscape whole. Snow covered the valleys, buried the trails, and softened every ridge into an endless ocean of white. The temperature hovered below zero, and a hard wind rolled across the tundra with enough force to steal heat from exposed skin in minutes. I was conducting a remote survival assessment, carrying a heavy pack loaded with emergency supplies, navigation equipment, and enough food to remain in the field for several days. Visibility changed constantly as curtains of blowing snow drifted across the frozen terrain. It was the kind of environment where a person could disappear forever less than a mile from safety. Around midday, I noticed something unusual near the crest of a low ridge. At first, it looked like a splash of paint against the snow. Then I realized what it was. Blood. Fresh blood. Bright red against the white ground. I crouched immediately and studied the scene. There was no sign of a struggle. No drag marks. No evidence of a predator attack. Just droplets leading northward in a steady pattern. Whatever was bleeding was still moving. I followed the trail. The farther I traveled, the more curious the pattern became. Large canine tracks appeared beside the blood. Not wolf tracks. The stride was wrong. Too controlled. Too purposeful. This animal had spent time around humans. Every few yards another crimson stain marked the route. The weather was deteriorating rapidly, and drifting snow erased portions of the trail almost as quickly as I found them. Yet somehow the path continued. Nearly an hour later, I reached a narrow valley surrounded by wind-carved ridges. That was when I finally saw the animal. A massive white dog stood on a rise overlooking the valley floor. His thick coat blended almost perfectly with the snow around him. Only his amber eyes stood out against the storm. One front leg was injured. Blood stained the fur around his paw. He stared directly at me without fear, without aggression, just watching, evaluating. Then he turned his head toward a distant ridge and looked back at me. Once, twice. The gesture felt deliberate, almost like an invitation. Before I could move, the dog started walking away. Every 20 yards, he stopped and glanced over his shoulder. Waiting. The behavior triggered something in my training. Working dogs often use visual cues when directing handlers toward a target. Rationally, I knew this animal was not my partner. Yet every instinct told me he wanted me to follow. So I did. The dog led me across the valley and up a snow-covered slope battered by relentless wind. Several times I lost sight of him in the swirling whiteout. Each time he reappeared farther ahead, standing still until I caught up. Eventually, he stopped near a cluster of ice-covered rocks protruding from the ridge. Then he barked. Sharp. Repeated. Urgent. I approached cautiously. At first I saw nothing except snow and stone. Then a gust of wind swept across the ridge and exposed something dark beneath the ice. Metal. I dropped to one knee and brushed away the snow with my glove. A rusted steel pipe emerged from the frozen ground. It extended vertically through the ice before disappearing below the surface. My pulse quickened immediately. A pipe like that had no business existing in the middle of untouched wilderness. The dog barked again and limped closer. I cleared more snow from around the pipe and placed a gloved hand near the opening. For a moment I felt nothing. Then a faint current of air touched my fingertips. Warm air. Very weak, but unmistakably warm. I looked at the dog. He was staring directly at me. Then I looked back at the pipe protruding from the frozen earth. Somewhere beneath that ridge, hidden below layers of snow and permafrost, something was generating heat. And in a place where winter could kill a person in a single night, there was only one reason warmth would still exist underground. Someone was alive down there. Most people would have turned around right there. A steel pipe sticking out of the frozen ground in the middle of nowhere was strange enough. A wounded dog leading a stranger directly to it was stranger still. But what bothered me most was the warm air. Alaska in winter is brutally honest. Everything loses heat. Vehicles freeze. Batteries die. Water turns solid. If warmth was escaping from beneath that ridge, something below was still functioning. And if something was functioning, there was a chance someone was depending on it to stay alive. The wind intensified as I removed a compact thermal scanner from my pack. Snow whipped across the ridge, rattling against my jacket and stinging any exposed skin. I aimed the scanner at the steel pipe and waited for the display to stabilize. At first, the screen showed nothing unusual. Then a faint orange glow appeared deep inside the shaft. Heat. Weak, but measurable. I checked the reading twice to make sure the storm was not creating interference. The result remained the same. There was a heat source below ground. My pulse quickened. The dog stepped closer and pressed his nose against the pipe. He released a low whine, then looked at me again. It was impossible to ignore the feeling that he was trying to communicate something urgent. His injured leg trembled from exhaustion. Blood continued dripping onto the snow beneath him. Yet instead of seeking shelter, food, or warmth, he remained focused on this exact location. Whatever was under the ridge mattered more to him than his own survival. I began searching the surrounding area. A pipe alone meant little. A pipe connected to a structure meant everything. Using a collapsible probe from my pack, I pushed through the snow around the ridge. The first few attempts hit frozen soil. Then the tip struck something solid. Metal. I tried another location 6 feet away. Metal again. My attention sharpened immediately. I moved farther downslope and repeated the process. Another impact. Whatever lay beneath us was large. Not a storage container. Not a simple utility box. Something much bigger. The dog suddenly limped several yards away and started pawing at the snow. I followed him. Beneath the drift, the probe struck metal once more. This time the sound was different. Hollow. My training took over. Structures leave patterns. Ventilation pipes, support surfaces, buried access points. Piece by piece, the layout began forming inside my mind. There was only one explanation that fit the evidence. We were standing on top of an underground bunker. I cleared snow with my shovel, exposing more of the buried surface. The steel beneath showed signs of age, but not abandonment. Someone had maintained it. Someone had relied on it. The question was whether they were still alive. I returned to the ventilation pipe and crouched beside it. At first all I heard was wind. Then I thought I detected something else. A faint sound buried beneath the storm. I held my breath and listened carefully. Tap. I froze. Several seconds passed. Then it came again. Tap. Tap. The noise was weak, irregular, but unmistakably deliberate. My heart immediately started pounding harder. That was not machinery. That was not shifting ice. Somebody was signaling from below. I leaned closer to the pipe. If you can hear me, make another sound. For a moment, there was only silence. Then 3 faint taps echoed upward through the metal shaft. Relief washed through me so fast, it almost felt physical. Whoever was down there was alive. Barely, perhaps, but alive. I looked toward the white dog. He stood perfectly still, watching me. Suddenly, his entire journey made sense. He had not wandered across the tundra by accident. He had come looking for help. Somehow, despite injury, cold, and exhaustion, he had traveled through one of the harshest environments on Earth until he found another human being. And then he had led me directly back to the source of the problem. I pulled out my satellite communicator and attempted to send an emergency distress packet. The device searched for a connection through the storm. The signal flickered uncertainly before finally transmitting a limited emergency burst containing my coordinates. It might reach rescuers. It might not. Either way, waiting was no longer an option. Every minute mattered. Hypothermia kills quietly and relentlessly. If the survivor below was already weak enough to communicate only through faint tapping, time was running out. I gripped my shovel and began digging with renewed urgency. The dog remained beside me despite his injury, staring toward the snow-covered ridge as if he knew exactly what we would find underneath. 20 minutes later, my shovel struck something different. Not a wall. Not a support beam. A flat steel surface buried beneath nearly 3 feet of compacted snow. I cleared more of the area. Slowly, the outline emerged. Thick reinforced steel. Heavy hinges. An access hatch. The entrance to the bunker. I brushed away the last layer of ice covering the handle and placed my hand against the frozen metal. Somewhere directly beneath me, a stranger was fighting to stay alive. Then, through the steel, I heard it again. 3 weak knocks, followed by silence. I pressed my ear against the steel hatch and listened. The wind howled across the ridge above us, but beneath the noise came the same faint signal. 3 weak knocks. Then silence. Whoever was trapped below had almost no strength left. The cold was winning. I brushed the remaining snow from the surface and exposed the full outline of the hatch. It measured roughly 4 feet across and was built from reinforced steel thick enough to withstand decades beneath the Alaskan wilderness. This was no ordinary shelter. Someone had invested serious resources into constructing it. The white dog limped closer and lowered his head against the metal. His tail moved once. Just once. Then he looked at me with exhausted eyes. I understood. He had done his job. Now the rest was up to me. The handle was frozen solid beneath a layer of ice. I attacked it with the pick end of my compact ice tool, chipping away carefully to avoid damaging the mechanism underneath. Fragments of ice scattered across the snow. My gloves stiffened with frozen moisture. The temperature continued dropping as daylight slowly faded behind. Thick storm clouds. Alaska wastes no time reminding people how fragile they are. Every rescue becomes a race against darkness. Once enough ice had been cleared, I wrapped both hands around the handle and pulled. Nothing. The hatch did not move even a fraction of an inch. I adjusted my stance and tried again with my full body weight. Still nothing. Either the locking mechanism was engaged from below or years of freezing temperatures had sealed the metal shut. Neither possibility was encouraging. I reached into my pack and removed a compact pry bar. Sliding the tip beneath the edge, I applied steady pressure. The steel groaned softly. Encouraging. I shifted position and pushed harder. A sharp crack echoed beneath the snow as a layer of frozen sealant finally gave way. Then came something unexpected. Warm air escaped through the newly opened gap. Not much, but enough. Enough to fog my goggles. Enough to confirm that life still existed somewhere beneath us. The dog immediately raised his head and released a hopeful whine. He could smell it too. I widened the opening little by little. The process was painfully slow. Every inch felt like a victory. Every minute felt stolen from the person waiting below. Finally, the hatch lifted several inches. I secured it with the pry bar and shined my flashlight into the darkness. A metal ladder descended deep underground. The beam vanished into shadows. For a brief moment, I simply stared. The bunker was real. Hidden beneath snow, ice, and permafrost, an entire structure had survived unnoticed in one of the harshest environments on Earth. I clipped a safety line to my harness and anchored it to an exposed section of steel before beginning my descent. The moment I entered the shaft, the noise of the storm faded. With every rung, the outside world seemed farther away. 20 feet below the surface, my boots touched solid concrete. I swept the flashlight across the chamber ahead. Shelves lined the walls. Storage containers sat stacked in neat rows. Water filtration equipment occupied one corner. Fuel containers occupied another. Emergency lights glowed dimly overhead, barely illuminating the room with a weak amber haze. Whoever built this place had prepared for isolation. Long-term isolation. Then my flashlight landed on a figure lying beneath several blankets near a portable heater. A man. Motionless. I crossed the room immediately. His face was pale. His beard was covered with frost. His breathing was shallow and uneven. But he was alive. Barely. When I checked his pulse, I found a weak rhythm beneath cold skin. Relief flooded through me. We had reached him in time. His eyelids fluttered open. Cloudy blue eyes struggled to focus on my face. For several seconds he simply stared, as if trying to determine whether I was real or some hallucination created by exhaustion. Then his cracked lips moved. The dog? I nodded. He found me. He's alive. The old man closed his eyes and released a trembling breath. Good boy. The words were barely audible. I began unpacking emergency warming supplies while assessing his condition. Severe hypothermia, dehydration, exhaustion. The signs were unmistakable. The bunker heater still functioned, but not well enough. Several warning lights blinked on nearby equipment panels. Something had failed. Maybe multiple systems. Whatever had happened down here, it had slowly pushed the bunker toward catastrophe. As I worked, my flashlight swept across a small table beside the bed. A framed photograph rested there. The old man stood smiling beside a young woman wearing Arctic field gear. Between them sat the same white dog, younger and healthier than he looked now. A family portrait. My eyes returned to the survivor. Where is she? I asked quietly. The old man stared at the photograph for a long moment. Pain crossed his face. Not physical pain. Something deeper. Finally he answered. My daughter. She went out during the storm. Tried to reach the weather station. Never came back. The room fell silent. Even the faint hum of the bunker seemed distant. How long ago? I asked. His eyes lowered. 8 days. Maybe 9. I felt my stomach tighten. 9 days in conditions like these left little room for hope. Yet before I could ask another question, a violent metallic bang echoed somewhere deeper inside the bunker. The sound reverberated through the concrete walls. Then another impact. Followed. And another. The old man's eyes widened instantly. The generator room, he whispered. Then every light in the bunker went out. Darkness swallowed the bunker so completely that for a second it felt like the structure itself had vanished around us. The weak amber lights disappeared. The hum of electrical equipment died. Even the portable heater near the old man's bed fell silent. Only the beam from my flashlight remained, cutting a narrow path through the blackness. Somewhere deeper inside the bunker, metal scraped against metal. Then came another loud impact. The old man's breathing quickened immediately. No, he whispered. Not now. I swung the flashlight toward the rear corridor. The beam illuminated shelves packed with supplies, oxygen cylinders, maintenance equipment, and survival gear. Nothing appeared disturbed. Yet the sound had come from somewhere beyond the storage section. Another grinding noise echoed through the structure. The bunker vibrated slightly beneath my boots. Not an explosion. Not structural collapse. Mechanical failure. I turned back toward the old man. What happened? Generator problem, he said between shallow breaths. Been failing for days. I thought I fixed it. Guess I was wrong. If the generator died completely, the consequences could become deadly very quickly. Heat systems would fail. Ventilation would stop. Batteries would eventually drain. In a sealed underground shelter buried beneath Arctic ice, electricity was not a convenience. It was survival itself. Stay here, I told him. I'm checking it. The old man grabbed my sleeve with surprising strength. His eyes widened. Fuel room first. Check fuel room. If the line ruptured. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I understood immediately. Fuel leak plus electrical failure could turn a rescue into a disaster. I moved toward the rear corridor while keeping my flashlight beam steady. The air felt colder already. Every breath seemed sharper than before. The bunker had been fighting the Arctic for days, maybe weeks. Now its defenses were collapsing. The corridor led to a reinforced maintenance section separated from the living quarters by a heavy steel door. I pushed it. Open carefully. The smell hit me immediately. Diesel fuel. Not overwhelming, but noticeable. My pulse accelerated. I followed the scent into the generator room. The flashlight revealed a large diesel generator positioned behind a protective barrier. One side panel hung partially open. Warning indicators blinked weakly from emergency battery reserves. Fuel had leaked across the floor beneath a damaged supply fitting. Fortunately, the quantity appeared small. More important, there was no fire. No visible spark source. No smoke. The situation remained dangerous but manageable. I crouched beside the equipment and examined the damage. One vibration clamp had broken, allowing the fuel line to shift gradually over time. Continuous movement had weakened the connection until the fitting finally cracked. Fuel pressure dropped. Generator output became unstable. Eventually, the system shut itself down to prevent catastrophic failure. The bunker had not lost power because of age alone. It had lost power because one inexpensive component finally failed after years of service. Sometimes survival depends on something no larger than a human finger. I located a maintenance toolbox nearby and searched for replacement parts. Whoever owned this bunker believed in preparation. The shelves were organized with military precision. Spare filters, electrical connectors, hose fittings, fasteners, everything labeled, everything maintained. After several minutes, I found a compatible clamp. I isolated the damaged section, installed the replacement, tightened the connection, and inspected the surrounding lines for additional leaks. So far, nothing else appeared compromised. Good. Very good. But repairing the leak solved only part of the problem. The generator still refused to run. I checked the control panel. A fault code flashed repeatedly across the small screen. Airflow restriction. My flashlight moved upward toward the ventilation assembly mounted above the generator housing. Ice crystals coated sections of the intake duct. More importantly, A frozen blockage had formed inside the external airflow channel. Reduced airflow. Increased operating temperature. Automatic shutdown. Suddenly, everything made sense. The bunker had been slowly suffocating itself. The old man had managed to keep the system alive longer than most people could have. But eventually the Arctic always finds weaknesses. I grabbed a maintenance rod and began breaking apart the ice buildup inside the duct. Chunks fell onto the concrete floor. Cold air immediately rushed through the opening. The difference was noticeable. Encouraging. Once the obstruction was cleared, I reset the fault system and pressed the ignition switch. For several seconds nothing happened. Then the starter motor engaged. The engine coughed once, twice, a third time. Finally the generator roared back to life. The sound echoed through the bunker like a heartbeat returning after a near-fatal pause. Ventilation fans spun up. Electrical systems reactivated. One by one the emergency lights flickered back on throughout the maintenance corridor. Relief washed through me. The bunker was alive again. At least for now. Then I noticed something attached to a nearby bulletin board. A laminated topographic map. Several locations were marked in red ink. One marker stood out immediately. It lay nearly 15 miles east of the bunker. Beside it, someone had written a single note in hurried handwriting. Weather Station 14. Last transmission received. My eyes narrowed. The old man's daughter had supposedly left during the storm to reach a weather station. If this map reflected her intended route, then this location might be the last place anyone knew she was heading. I folded the map carefully and returned toward the living quarters. The old man looked up the moment I entered. The lights had returned. The heater was running again. His expression softened with visible relief. "You fixed it," he whispered. "Temporary fix," I said. Then I held up the map. "Tell me about Weather Station 14. The color drained from his face. For several long seconds, he said nothing at all. Then his eyes filled with grief. That's where she was trying to go when I lost her. Outside, the storm continued raging above thousands of pounds of snow and ice. But for the first time since entering the bunker, I realized this rescue might involve more than one victim. Somewhere beyond the white wilderness, hidden beneath nearly 9 days of drifting snow, the final trail of a missing woman was still waiting to be found. The old man stared at the map for so long that I wondered if he had stopped seeing the paper entirely. Sometimes grief works that way. A person looks directly at the thing that hurts them most and sees only memory. The heater hummed softly beside his bed, pushing warm air into the bunker once more, but the relief brought by restored power lasted only a few seconds before reality settled back over the room. Somewhere out in the frozen wilderness, his daughter had vanished nearly 9 days earlier. 9 days. In most situations, that number would end the conversation. Search teams operate on probabilities. Weather, exposure, terrain, available shelter. Alaska is unforgiving even when conditions are favorable. During a major winter storm, survival becomes measured in hours rather than days. Yet something about this situation refused to fit neatly into the category of hopeless. Maybe it was the bunker itself. Maybe it was the organized supplies. Or maybe it was the white dog who had somehow crossed miles of snow and ice to bring help back here. I pulled a chair closer to the old man's bed. "Tell me everything from the beginning." He nodded slowly. "Her name was Emily. Meteorologist. Smarter than me. Smarter than anyone I ever met." His tired eyes drifted toward the photograph on the table. "We built this bunker together after my wife died. Spent years preparing it. Food, power, medical supplies, weather equipment. We wanted a place where no storm could touch us." The irony in his voice was impossible to miss. No storm could touch us. Then one finally did. He explained that Emily operated a small weather monitoring network scattered across remote sections of the region. Several stations collected data used by research groups studying Arctic climate conditions. Most could be accessed remotely, but one installation, Weather Station 14, occasionally required physical maintenance. 8 days earlier, a fault alert appeared during the early morning hours. Emily believed she could reach the station, perform repairs, and return before the worst of the incoming storm arrived. She was wrong. The weather system accelerated unexpectedly. Visibility collapsed. Winds intensified. Communication failed. By the time conditions became dangerous, she was already outside. "Did she contact you afterward?" I asked. "Once." His answer came immediately. "Radio transmission. Weak signal. She said she was turning back. Said Kodiak was with her. Then nothing. His voice cracked slightly at the dog's name. Kodiak. At least now I knew what to call the white shepherd sleeping near the heater. The dog lifted his head as if recognizing the sound. His amber eyes met mine briefly before closing again. Exhaustion was finally catching him. He had completed his mission. Every injury, every mile, every drop of blood on the snow had led him here. The old man swallowed hard. I searched when the storm eased. Couldn't find tracks. Couldn't find her. Then the generator problem started. After that, I barely had enough strength to keep this place running. I looked down at the map. The route between the bunker and Weather Station 14 crossed difficult terrain. Ridges, frozen creek beds, open tundra exposed to brutal winds. A person caught there during whiteout conditions could easily become disoriented. Yet another detail bothered me. If Emily disappeared while returning from the station, why had Kodiak eventually returned alone? Dogs rarely abandon people they love unless forced by circumstances beyond their control. I studied the marked route more carefully. Several handwritten notes appeared near different landmarks. Elevation points, emergency caches, shelter markers. Then one annotation caught my attention. A small red circle approximately halfway between the bunker and the weather station. Unlike the other markings, this one contained no description. Just a circle. What's this? I asked. The old man's expression changed immediately. Confusion, then recognition, finally surprise. I haven't seen that mark before. Emily must have added it. The answer sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with temperature. If Emily marked a location before disappearing, there was a reason. Researchers document observations. Survivalists document resources. Neither wastes effort marking meaningless locations. My eyes returned to the map. The red circle sat near a narrow ridge system several miles east of the bunker. Not directly on the route. Slightly off it. Deliberately off it. Before I could ask another question, Kodiak suddenly lifted his head. His ears stood erect. Every muscle in his body tightened. The transformation was immediate. 1 second he looked exhausted. The next he was alert. Listening. Focused on something only he could hear. Then the dog struggled to his feet, limped toward the bunker door, and released a low, urgent whine. Not fear. Not pain. A warning. Or an invitation. I rose slowly and looked at the map once more. Then I looked toward Kodiak. The old man followed my gaze. What is it? He asked. I folded the map and slipped it into my jacket. I think your dog is trying to show us where Emily went. Kodiak was already waiting at the bunker entrance when I finished securing the generator room. The massive white shepherd stood with his weight shifted awkwardly away from the injured leg, but determination burned in his amber eyes. Whatever exhaustion had nearly collapsed him earlier seemed forgotten. He stared at the door, then at me, then back at the door again. The message could not have been clearer. Follow me. I looked toward the old man. He understood immediately. You're going after her. It wasn't a question. I checked my watch, then glanced toward the reinforced hatch leading to the surface. Daylight was fading fast. The storm remained active, though conditions appeared slightly more stable than before. Logic suggested waiting until morning. Better visibility. More preparation. Less risk. But logic also reminded me that every passing hour buried evidence beneath fresh snow. If Emily had left a trail, nature was erasing it with every gust of wind. I nodded. I'll follow the route tonight. The old man closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, they looked older somehow. Tell her. He stopped himself. The unfinished sentence lingered in the bunker. Neither of us needed to hear the ending. I gathered additional supplies before leaving. Medical kit. Thermal blanket. Emergency locator beacon. Spare batteries. Climbing rope. Enough equipment to stabilize a survivor if by some miracle one was found alive. Then I studied the map one final time. Weather Station 14 lay nearly 15 miles away. The unexplained red circle sat several miles short of the station, slightly east of the main route. If Kodiak truly knew where he was going, that location seemed like the most logical starting point. The dog remained impatient beside the ladder. Every few seconds he glanced upward. Waiting. Ready. We climbed out into the Arctic twilight together. The wind struck immediately. Even after spending hours underground, I had forgotten how savage the cold felt. Snow drifted across the ridge in ghostly waves beneath a darkening sky. Visibility stretched only a few hundred yards before fading into gray emptiness. Kodiak moved without hesitation. He descended the slope and headed east. I followed. The wilderness swallowed us almost immediately. For the next 2 hours, we traveled through frozen valleys and over snow-covered ridges. The dog maintained a steady pace despite his injury. Occasionally, he paused to sniff the wind before continuing. Several times, I checked the map and GPS. Each time, I realized he was guiding us directly toward the mysterious red circle. That alone was enough to keep me moving. Around midnight, the terrain changed. Steeper slopes emerged ahead. Jagged rock formations pierced the snow like broken teeth. Wind accelerated through the narrow passages between ridges, creating eerie whistles that echoed across the darkness. Kodiak slowed. His posture changed. Alert. Focused. Searching. Something nearby mattered. I switched on my flashlight and swept the beam across the ground. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then a shape appeared beneath a shallow drift. Fabric. I rushed forward and pulled away the snow. A backpack emerged. Red. Weatherproof. Partially buried. My pulse quickened immediately. Inside, I found emergency rations, spare gloves, batteries, and a weather notebook. Every item remained neatly packed. The owner had not abandoned the bag intentionally. Something forced her to leave it behind. Then I found the identification card clipped inside one compartment. Emily Harper, the old man's daughter. Kodiak released a low whine and pressed his nose against the backpack. For a moment, he simply stood there, silent, motionless. The reaction hit harder than any piece of evidence. Dogs do not mourn objects. They mourn memories attached to them. This pack belonged to someone he loved. I opened the weather notebook carefully. Most pages contained ordinary field observations. Wind speeds, temperatures, instrument readings. Then, near the back, I found newer entries written in hurried handwriting. Storm worsening. Visibility near zero. Turning back. Taking East Ridge route. Shelter marker visible ahead. My eyes narrowed. Shelter marker. Another note followed several pages later. Radio damaged. Kodiak injured. Found something unexpected. Last entry before the writing stopped completely. Heading toward emergency cache near Ridge. If Dad gets this, tell him I'm okay. The sentence ended there. No signature. No final note. Nothing. I looked up from the notebook and scanned the darkness surrounding us. Somewhere nearby, Emily had written those words. Somewhere nearby, she had disappeared. Then Kodiak suddenly stiffened. His ears rose. His entire body locked onto a point farther up the ridge. Before I could react, he limped forward through the snow. 10 yards. 20. 30. Then he stopped beside a half-buried rock outcrop and began digging furiously with his good paw. Snow scattered behind him. My flashlight beam followed the movement. At first, I saw only ice and stone. Then something metallic reflected the light. A broken radio antenna protruded from beneath the snow, and beside it, barely visible under weeks of drifting powder, lay the faint outline of human footprints leading higher into the mountains. The footprints were barely visible beneath drifting snow, but once I recognized them, I could not unsee them. Human tracks. Old, distorted by wind and time, yet still following a deliberate path higher into the mountains. I crouched beside the broken radio antenna and examined the area carefully. The metal housing was cracked from impact. A section of cable protruded from the snow, frozen solid. Emily had been here. The notebook proved it. The damaged radio proved it. More importantly, the direction of the footprints suggested she had remained mobile after abandoning the backpack. That single fact changed everything. Most fatal exposure incidents follow a predictable pattern. People become disoriented, exhausted, then stationary. Emily had continued moving. She had a destination. Kodiak stood beside the tracks, staring upslope. His tail remained motionless. Every instinct in the dog seemed focused on the terrain ahead. I switched off my flashlight for a moment and studied the landscape beneath the moonlight filtering through broken clouds. The storm was weakening. Visibility had improved dramatically compared to earlier conditions. Jagged ridges stretched across the horizon like dark waves frozen in stone. Somewhere among them lay the answer to what happened 8 days ago. We continued climbing. The route became steeper with every 100 yards. Several times I needed both hands to navigate icy sections where the snow concealed dangerous drop-offs. Kodiak moved carefully despite his injury. Whenever he lost sight of the trail, he lowered his nose and searched until he found it again. The dog was no longer guiding me toward a bunker. He was retracing memory. Nearly an hour later, we reached a narrow saddle between two ridges. Wind swept across the opening with enough force to shake loose powder from the surrounding slopes. Something caught my eye immediately. A collapsed emergency shelter. Bright orange fabric protruded from the snow near a cluster of rocks. I approached cautiously. The structure had once been a portable survival tent designed for Arctic conditions. Now half of it was torn open. One support pole snapped cleanly in two. Snow had filled most of the interior. I searched the area. More evidence appeared almost immediately. Empty food wrappers. A damaged flashlight. A thermal blanket partially buried beneath ice. Emily had reached this location alive. She had attempted to shelter here. The discovery filled me with equal parts hope and dread. Hope because she survived longer than expected. Dread because she eventually left. The question was why. I searched the shelter more thoroughly. Near the rear corner, I discovered another notebook page tucked beneath a supply pouch. The paper was protected inside a waterproof sleeve. Emily's handwriting covered most of the surface. Generator parts at cache damaged. Can't stay here. Need to reach secondary shelter before weather returns. Kodiak won't leave me. Good dog. Dad would laugh if he saw him stealing my gloves again. The final line stopped me cold. I can see the old military observation station from the ridge. If I make it there, I'll have cover. An observation station. I immediately unfolded the map again. Several abandoned Cold War installations existed throughout remote sections of Alaska. Most were long forgotten. Some remained standing. Others had collapsed decades earlier. If Emily spotted one nearby, she may have considered it her best chance for survival. I scanned the ridgeline through binoculars. At first I saw only darkness and snow. Then a silhouette emerged on a distant peak. Angular. Artificial. A structure. Barely visible against the horizon. Kodiak noticed it too. He released a low whine and started moving before I could say a word. We descended the opposite side of the ridge and pushed toward the abandoned station. The journey took nearly 90 exhausting minutes. As we approached, details became clearer. The facility consisted of a small communications tower attached to a reinforced building partially buried by decades of drifting snow. Rust stained the exterior walls. Windows were shattered. One section of the roof had collapsed inward. The place looked abandoned by humanity and claimed by winter. Yet something felt wrong. Or perhaps right. Fresh snow covered most surfaces, but one narrow path leading toward the entrance appeared slightly disturbed. Not recent. Not obvious. But different. My pulse accelerated. I moved toward the doorway. The metal door hung partially open. Wind pushed it back and forth with a slow creaking rhythm. Inside, darkness waited. I swept my flashlight through the entrance. Broken equipment. Fallen ceiling panels. Dust. Ice. Then the beam landed on something resting against the far wall. A bright blue winter jacket. Human. Motionless. For one terrible second, I thought the search was over. Kodiak rushed past me before I could stop him. The dog crossed the room and pressed his nose against the figure. Then something happened that made my heart hammer against my ribs. The figure moved. Just slightly. But enough. A trembling hand emerged from beneath the jacket and touched Kodiak's face. For a moment, I simply stood frozen in the doorway, unable to trust my own eyes. The hand had moved. Not much. Barely an inch. But it had moved. After everything we had found, the abandoned backpack, the damaged radio, the emergency shelter buried by snow, I had already begun preparing myself for the possibility that this search would end with recovery rather than rescue. Yet the figure beneath the blue jacket was alive. Kodiak let out a sharp bark and immediately pressed closer. A weak hand emerged again from beneath the layers of blankets and clothing and rested against the side of his face. The dog whined softly, tail wagging despite exhaustion and injury. 8 days of uncertainty disappeared in that single moment. Emily had survived. I rushed across the room and dropped to one knee beside her. She looked terrible. Her face was pale and gaunt, lips cracked from dehydration. Dark circles surrounded exhausted eyes that struggled to focus beneath the flashlight beam. Yet she was conscious. Barely, but conscious. Kodiak never left, she whispered. Her voice sounded rough, almost broken. He kept coming back, kept checking the ridge. Her hand remained buried in the thick fur around his neck. I quickly began assessing her condition. Severe dehydration, significant weight loss, extreme fatigue, mild frostbite on 2 fingertips. But compared to what I expected after 8 days in Arctic conditions, she was remarkably fortunate. The abandoned observation station had saved her life. Despite the broken windows and collapsed roof section, one interior storage room remained largely protected from the wind. It wasn't comfortable, but it provided shelter. More importantly, it trapped enough residual warmth to slow the deadly progression of exposure. I prepared heated fluids from my emergency supplies and encouraged her to drink slowly. Color returned to her face almost immediately. As she regained strength, the story finally emerged. After leaving Weather Station 14, she had encountered deteriorating conditions far sooner than forecast models predicted. Visibility collapsed. Winds exceeded dangerous levels. Then the storm intensified beyond anything she had experienced before. During the return trip, Kodiak injured his leg crossing a section of ice-covered rock. While helping him, she slipped and damaged her radio. Communication ended. Navigation became nearly impossible. She reached the emergency shelter, but discovered critical repair supplies stored there had been destroyed by moisture and freezing temperatures. Staying meant eventual death. Moving offered at least a chance. So she pushed onward toward the abandoned observation station she had spotted during a previous survey flight months earlier. I made it here, she said quietly. Barely. Couldn't reach Dad. Couldn't reach anyone. Every day, I hoped the storm would clear. Every day it got worse. Her eyes drifted toward Kodiak. Then one morning he disappeared. I thought he finally gave up on me. The white shepherd immediately lifted his head as though offended by the suggestion. Despite everything, Emily managed a weak smile. Good to know I was wrong. Outside, wind rattled loose metal panels against the side of the structure. The sound reminded me how fragile our situation remained. Emily was alive, but she could not walk 15 miles back to the bunker through deep snow and mountain terrain. Kodiak was injured. The old man remained underground waiting for answers. We still needed extraction. I stepped outside and activated my satellite communicator again. This time the sky had partially cleared. The signal locked almost immediately. Coordinates transmitted successfully. Emergency rescue request confirmed. For the first time since finding the blood trail, I knew help was truly coming. The relief lasted only seconds. A distant rumble echoed across the mountains. I turned toward the western horizon. Dark clouds were already building beyond the ridges. Another storm system. Fast-moving. Larger than the previous one. The weather window was closing. I returned inside. Emily saw my expression immediately. What's wrong? Rescue is coming, I said honestly. But we need to move before that storm reaches us. The smile faded from her face. She understood. Everyone who spends enough time in Alaska learns to respect the weather. Sometimes it gives you a second chance. Sometimes it takes it away without warning. Together we improvised a transport sled from abandoned equipment found inside the station. It wasn't elegant, but it would work. Emily could ride while conserving energy. Kodiak could stay off his injured leg whenever necessary. Once everything was prepared, we began the long journey back toward the bunker. The first few miles passed surprisingly well. The sky remained clear enough for navigation. Hope grew with every step. Then the wind shifted. Snow began falling again. Within minutes, visibility started shrinking. The approaching storm had arrived faster than expected. Much faster. I tightened my grip on the sled rope and pushed forward. Behind me, Emily wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders. Beside her, Kodiak suddenly stumbled. The dog tried to recover, but failed. His injured leg finally collapsed beneath him. He hit the snow hard and did not immediately get back up. Kodiak hit the snow hard and stayed there. For a terrifying second, neither Emily nor I moved. The white shepherd's chest rose once. Then again, but barely. His body trembled from exhaustion. Blood stained the fur around his injured leg. Every mile he had traveled since leaving the bunker, every ridge he had crossed, every frozen valley he had navigated in search of help had finally caught up with him. Emily immediately dropped from the sled and knelt beside him despite her own weakness. No, 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 she whispered, brushing snow from his face. Come on, buddy. Not now. Please not now. Kodiak opened his eyes at the sound of her voice. His tail moved once against the snow. Just once. Then he rested his head on her lap. I checked his pulse. Weak, but present. Severe exhaustion. Dehydration. Blood loss. Nothing about his condition surprised me. Frankly, it was a miracle he had made it this far. Most animals would have died days earlier. Yet somehow he had crossed miles of Arctic wilderness alone, found a stranger, led that stranger back to a buried bunker, and then guided us toward Emily's location. The dog had accomplished what most rescue teams would struggle to achieve in those conditions. The storm intensified around us. Wind screamed across the ridge, driving fresh snow into every exposed surface. Visibility dropped rapidly. We were running out of time. I secured Kodiak onto the sled beside Emily and resumed pulling. Every step became harder. Snow deepened. Gusts hammered against us with enough force to push us sideways. The world shrank into a swirling tunnel of white. Yet we kept moving. 1 mile, then another, then another. Hours seemed to pass. My shoulders burned. My legs felt heavy. But eventually a familiar outline appeared through the storm. The ridge above the bunker. Relief hit so suddenly that I nearly laughed. We had made it. We descended toward the hidden hatch and climbed back underground just as the blizzard reached full strength. The old man looked up from his bed when the bunker door opened. For a moment, confusion crossed his face. Then he saw Emily. The expression that followed is something I will never forget. 8 days of fear, grief, regret, and uncertainty vanished instantly. Emily. His voice broke completely. Emily rushed forward and wrapped her arms around him. Neither spoke for several seconds. They simply held each other while tears rolled freely down both faces. Some reunions do not need words. I stepped away quietly and turned my attention toward Kodiak. The dog remained motionless on the sled. His breathing was shallow. Too shallow. Emily noticed immediately and joined me beside him. We worked together for the next hour. Warm blankets, fluids, careful treatment for the injured leg. Every method available. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, his condition stabilized. Then came the sound I had been waiting for. The distant thump of rotor blades. Rescue helicopters. The emergency signal had finally reached the outside world. By dawn, a coordinated extraction team arrived at the bunker. Medical personnel treated the old man and Emily while veterinarians examined Kodiak. The prognosis was encouraging. Exhausted, malnourished, injured, but alive. Very much alive. Several months later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. Inside was a photograph. The old man stood outside a rebuilt cabin beneath a bright summer sky. Emily stood beside him, smiling. And sitting proudly between them was Kodiak. His injured leg had healed. His coat looked healthy again. His amber eyes were just as alert as the day I first saw him standing on that frozen ridge. Tucked behind the photograph was a short note from Emily. It read, "Everyone calls me a survivor. Dad says you're the hero. But we both know the truth. None of us would be here without Kodiak. I still keep that picture today. Not because it reminds me of a successful rescue. I've been fortunate enough to participate in many of those. I keep it because it reminds me that courage sometimes arrives in unexpected forms. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it carries medical supplies. And sometimes it walks for miles through a deadly Arctic storm, leaving a trail of blood in the snow until someone finally follows it home.